This course is a kind of a complex course for some of us. As a professor, I've taught this many, many times, this course, either here at College of the Ozarks over at Hollister, Missouri, or Bartlesville, Oklahoma Wesleyan University. I've taught it several locations and I've taught it many times. It's really tough to teach this course the same way twice, though. I mean, you would think all I have to do is just rip out the PowerPoints and just go after it, and I've got all the cases. But it appears that every student section is different, and I don't know what your expectation is of me, but my expectation is of you is pretty much spelled out in the syllabus. That you have a responsibility as a student, just like I have a responsibility as a professor, and that's our agreement in the syllabus. This is college. This is university. And my expectation of you is a lot higher than maybe the expectation was of you earlier in your educational career process. So I just want you to know that. I can deliver all this information to you and post it on PowerPoint or Blackboard and just feed it all out to you. If that's the way you think you want it, but you're not going to learn anything unless you really get into the material. And some of you are more excited about this material, I understand, than others. I know a lot of you wake up in the morning and say, boy, I just can't wait to get to the government class at 9 o'clock. I mean, I understand that some are more excited than others. I know that's how I wake up every morning. I said, boy, I just can't wait to get in there. But I'm being truthful because I do enjoy visiting with you on this stuff because I think it's important. And that's why I'm such a geek that I actually listen to the presidential debates. Because I think it's important that we understand who our future president might be and who the policymakers might be that's going to impact everyone here. And I just kind of want you to somehow suck it up and pull it up this semester and try to understand how important this is. But for us to appreciate how important it is, we kind of have to understand where we've come from as a nation. And unfortunately, we have to get into a historical discussion on government and politics. And that's what we've kind of been doing. And I know a lot of you just bored to tears. But this is a requirement, and I hope that you somehow enjoy it. And this is usually when I get laughed at the most as a professor, when I'm making a comment like this or having a discussion like this. But I don't care because I say this crap because I like you. And I do care about you. Because this is not in my job description where I have to stand up and say this, unless I'm meant it. Any questions on my goofy discussion? Okay. I think you also have a responsibility that if you're doing poorly, you need to come and see me because I don't want anybody to be demoralized and feel like all is lost for the semester. Some of you will readjust after the first exam, and you'll do quite well on exam number 2. Like I've said, I had one student that I think made out of a 50-point exam, I think they made, I don't know, they got less than half, so they got a really low F. And that was the last F I ever saw from that person. The rest were all A's and B's because they readjusted. There is hope. And I think they either got an A-, which is an A, in the course, so they did well. Well, we're going to talk about separate but equal. We led up to the Civil War. We fought the Civil War. We added the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment to our Constitution. We talked about Jim Crow laws. It was a despicable, hateful time in our history. And we need to realize that it really wasn't that long ago that we had these Jim Crow laws. In fact, Jim Crow pretty much existed. And in fact, unfortunately, in pockets, it still might even exist to some degree. But it certainly existed up until the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was passed. And so 1964, well, I was 8 years old in 1964. And so that was within my lifetime that we had these Jim Crow laws. So it wasn't that long ago. I know you realize that you think of me as being ancient, being 55, but you're going to bat your eyes twice after you graduate from college, and you're going to be 55. So just mark my word on that one. Well, we're going to talk about, we move along with Reconstruction in the South. We go back and try to get the South rebuilt, back on sound economic footing. Try to bring it back into the fold of the nation. And it was never going to be easy. In fact, it was going to still be very, very difficult. But up until the Civil War, we were just individual states as the United States. It was almost United States, lowercase u, lowercase s. But after the Civil War, we became a nation. And we started referring to ourselves, even in the halls of Congress, as this nation. Members of Congress before the Civil War would talk about their states, our states. They wouldn't talk about it as a group of us'ns, one nation, if you will. But the South was pretty bitter, and the South still wanted to be able to determine its own course. Individual states wanted to determine their own course with regard to states' rights. You know, we obviously fought a war over states' rights, which included the elephant in the room of being slavery. Well, we had slavery no more, but we were still treating people differently. And so we had this ugly court decision where a person that was 7/8 Caucasian, 1/8 African American. He gets on a train, the conductor walks up, says, "I'm sorry, but you're not allowed to sit in this car, in this train. You have to move back where the African Americans sit, and you have your own car." And so that was discriminatory. And so that goes clear up to the Supreme Court. Well, here's the case. The state of Louisiana enacted a law that required separate railway cars for blacks and whites. In 1892, Homer Plessy, who was 7/8 Caucasian, took a seat in whites-only car of a Louisiana train. He refused to move to the car reserved for blacks and was arrested. The question was this, and this was 1892, by the way, 30-some years after the Civil War. Is Louisiana's law mandating racial segregation on its trains an unconstitutional infringement on both the privileges and immunities and the equal protection clauses of the 14th Amendment to the Constitution? So what was the decision? Was Louisiana discriminating against somebody because of their race? That's the question. What did the court decide? They were not discriminating against this person. Why were they not discriminating?
Because of the John, whatever you call them, laws. You just said it.
The Jim Crow laws?
Jim Crow laws.
Partly, and probably principally. But what was at issue here? Why did the court say that Louisiana was not discriminating? Yes?
Is it because he was 7/8 white?
He was 7/8 white.
They're just saying, well,
But he was, even though he was 7/8 white, he still had to go back to the blacks only rail car.
Maybe that, I don't know. Maybe
So he had enough black in him that they felt that he was a black person.
They allow them on the train, just not on the same one.
That's right, and that's exactly what the court reasoned, is that they could be treated equally, separate but equal. All the train was responsible for providing was a mode of transportation. They provided blacks a car to ride in, just like they were providing cars for white people to ride in. but that doesn't mean they had to put them together. So separate but equal. Isn't that pretty disgusting? I mean, seriously? Well, that's what became even more disgusting, is that's what that decision at the court would remain precedence until the 1950s. So for a generation plus, almost 2 generations, a generation is considered to be about 28 years, for more than a generation, and almost 2 generations, that would be the precedence with regard to determining what's discriminatory or not. So separate but equal was what we would live with. Here's the court's reasoning. No, the state law is within its constitutional boundaries, the court said. And by the way, this was a 7-vote for and a 1 vote against. There were only 8 justices at that time. Actually, there was 9, but only 8 participated. The majority, in an opinion authored by Justice Billings Brown, upheld state-imposed racial segregation. State-imposed racial segregation. So the states were determining his policy on how they're going to deal with different ethnic, racial groups. The justices based their decision on the separate but equal doctrine that separate facilities for blacks and whites satisfied the 14th Amendment so long as they were equal. And that's kind of what we just talked about. So Justice Brown conceded that the 14th Amendment intended to establish, he conceded that the 14th Amendment intended to establish absolute equality for the races before the law. But Brown noted that in the nature of things, and that's important, and I'll talk to you in a minute about why that's important. In the nature of things, it could not have been intended to abolish distinctions based upon color, or to enforce social as distinguished from political equality, or a commingling of the 2 races unsatisfactory to either. In short, segregation does not in itself constitute unlawful discrimination. Well, that's pretty profound. They were talking about the community when he was using words about, like, in the nature of things. The nature of things in the 1800s was there was a great divide between the 2 races. The Civil War, what preceded the Civil War, the animosity, the resentment following the Civil War during the whole Reconstruction process. The southern states were demoralized. And by the way, freemen in the South, even though they were not slaves any longer, were treated very, very poorly. So the nature of things is that we had these divided communities, especially in the South. What decision could the court have made any differently, keeping in mind in that time where there probably any other decision would have resulted in some kind of a riot or unrest in the southern states? What would have happened in the nature of things if the court said, no, the 14th Amendment says equality means equality, that you're going to integrate all public forms of transportation, and anything less than that is unacceptable? Yes?
It probably would have happened just like it happened during the Civil Rights Movement.
Yeah, there have been riots,
killings,
right.
Shootings at college universities.
So the bottom line is we weren't ready yet, and we weren't there yet.
Well, we weren't ready when it happened. It's a shame we couldn't have just got it over with earlier. We wouldn't have had so many weapons.
But it made a difference, perhaps, after the South got rebuilt. It was, quote unquote, made whole again after the Civil War.
It would have probably been worse if we did it earlier.
That's kind of where I think, and that may have been what the court was saying, because the justice even conceded that the 14th Amendment really meant equal and equal, not separate but equal, but equal. So he conceded that. But in the nature of things. So that's pretty profound. Brown versus Board of Education. Linda Brown was the student, and she was in Springfield this last year at Central High School in downtown Springfield, Missouri. And she was the student at issue in Brown versus Board of Education. I'm not going to read the Brown versus Board of Education, but suffice it to say that it had to do with school integration in Topeka, Kansas. A young lady wanted the opportunity to go and get a public education just like white kids did. And so she decided she was, her parents were paying taxes into the public school system. Why not me? Why can't I go in there? And so basically this was the decision that caused the Supreme Court to finally overrule Plessy versus Ferguson. Separate is inherently unequal. Separate is inherently discriminatory. Equal is equal. Separate is not equal. So school segregation is discriminatory. One of the things is why, since black people are not property, they're human beings, they're citizens, why do we make human beings, citizens, be made to feel inferior because they're not allowed to attend a white public school? So Brown versus Board of Education turned over precedents in law that was some 50 years old. So that basically just caused us to have school integration. It would be tested in Little Rock High School. Oh, by the way, that's back in the news again. I just need to go read it this weekend, but that's back in the news this week, the Little Rock High School incident. What happened in Little Rock High School was we had black children that wanted to attend public high school in Little Rock, Arkansas. The governor was a segregationist. Read that, racist. And he was going to use his Army National Guard in Little Rock, in Arkansas, to block the entrance of black school children who wanted to attend that public school. So he put the National Guard out there to keep black children out. What happened? Well, I'll tell you what happened. I knew you were going to ask. Dwight David Eisenhower was President of the United States. He didn't like what was going on in Little Rock. And so in his brilliant move, he federalized the Arkansas National Guard. And he brought him in under Title X, and he federalized the troops. And so instead of blocking the school's entrance, the kids' entrance into the school, under orders by the governor, they were now under orders by the president. So now they made a way for the kids to go into school. So they turned around. Made all the difference in the world. And to make sure that the National Guard was behaving itself under the president's orders, he also brought in the 101st Airborne Division out of Fort Campbell, Kentucky, and brought them down there. They were regular Army troops to make sure that the Arkansas Guard was behaving itself. And so that basically, and the governor was embarrassed and humiliated, as well as he should have been. And so that's when the integration issue was put into practice. Yes.
When did this happen?
In the 1950s.
Okay.
So after Brown versus Board of Education?
After Brown versus Board of Education. Right on the heels of Brown versus Board of Education. It was put into practice at that point. Obviously, Arkansas was one of the original slave states. So where do you stand? Do you think there will always be problems between African Americans and white Americans in the United States, or will there eventually be a solution? Well, let me throw this out. I usually throw this out during the first week of the course. I tend to believe, and I want you to correct me if you think I'm wrong, but for the generation that's largely represented in front of me, and I've had this conversation with my 34-year-old daughter, and I consider her to be among your generation. Because in a few years I'll be old enough to be your granddad, so I'm using that as long as I can. I'm just old enough to be your dad now, obviously, but my point is this. I think your generation, because of everything that has happened up to this point, is much less race conscious than my generation was. Because when you grew up, most of you in this room, most of you grew up in this world, in this country, you grew up under a different paradigm than I grew up under. After all of you pretty much have known a computer in your home. Most of you have. When I grew up, we never had a computer. I never had a computer until I was 39 years old in my home. So most of you have always had a microwave oven in your home. I never had a microwave oven until well after I was married. And then microwave ovens was new technology and it was very expensive to own one. All of you have had cell phones. I never owned my first cell phone until, gosh, I don't know, 2000, 2001. So it's different. And I think maybe you look at race differently than my generation did. I know I look at race differently. I think everybody's a living, breathing human being that ought to be given a fair shake. But not everybody in my generation feels that way, probably. So is it fair to say, is it safe to say, I should say, that we have much less of a problem now than we did 20, 30 years ago? And a lot of it has to do with your attitude as a generation. There are fewer perceived differences between people who are white, people who are black, people who are from Asia, people who are from south of the border, whatever the case may be. Am I on the wrong path? Am I being presumptuous in what you think? Yes?
I don't think it's bad. I just think it's not as public as it used to be. Like, there's still people out there.
Is it more tolerable?
I just feel like, because I've been discriminated a lot growing up. I mean, the first time I've ever heard me being called like a wetback, I was 5 years old. I didn't even know what it meant. I was playing on a park. People were saying it to me. I didn't know what it was to my cousin. He was all mad. I asked him what it meant, and he told me, you shouldn't let people talk to you like that. So, meaning ever since then, I've been aware of it, but it's pretty bad.
But it doesn't necessarily affect you day to day now.
I mean, I don't let it get to me. It doesn't really affect me as much as it used to be, but I just let it roll off. It doesn't bother me.
It's hurtful. Yeah, it's hurtful.
I mean, it's out there.
I've been discriminated against, but obviously I'm a white person, I'm a white man on top of that, so I'm not a woman. I want to make sure that's clear. So I don't have to worry about the female, the gender discrimination aspect. So I'm a majority, white Caucasian, middle-aged guy, the welder of the power stick in the United States, I understand. But am I really? I've been discriminated against because of where I'm from geographically. Oh, you're a hillbilly. You're from the Ozarks. Don't you think that I haven't had to listen to that? But it's not the same, I understand. And I'm not going to presume to make that argument.
No.
But it's also hurtful because they do think you're an idiot until you can prove yourself. So they find out you're from Southwest Missouri and you're working in Washington, D.C. in the Pentagon or something, and you're from Southwest Missouri. Do they have schools there yet?
Kind of the subject that Anthony Bourdain was here like last winter, and the show, they were in Joplin for 2 different places, and it made it look like everybody here, but they were like arm wrestling and doing like all that. Everybody was wearing like overalls, and
Yeah.
I'm like, really? I mean, it made us look like.
Right, exactly. That's the perception.
I mean, it was a crazy show. I was like,
Yeah. People actually go to Branson today from all parts of the world, nation, thinking they're going to see hillbillies out there in action. And that's exactly why they go there. Let's go see some redneck hillbillies acting stupid without their teeth and all that kind of stuff. That's a stereotype. Yes.
Yeah, my mother was really pleased from being north in Wisconsin when she found out I was dating a Missourian, because she has a very prejudiced view that anybody south of Illinois they're rednecks. I grew up with I went to a Catholic school. Everybody was white and everybody was Catholic. So when I did get married and I moved to San Diego, and even now I struggle with living here, if fellow students, when they find out I'm Catholic, they try to convert me. If you get closer to St. Louis or Kansas City, there's a big Catholic population, but when you're here in the southwest corner, there's not a really big population. And there was a lot of very hurtful words said by other people when the tornado hit the Catholic Church in Joplin.
It's pretty white down here too, isn't it?
And down here?
Yeah.
Actually, I don't think it's very white down. I think it's a nice mix. I don't see the students here being as prejudiced as back home.
On this campus, I would agree with you. But you go outside this campus is what I'm saying.
Well, I live in Carthage, so
You have Vietnamese, you have...
we have Hispanics and we have African Americans,
Right.
and I think
Carthage is diverse, relatively.
Yeah.
Relative size, I'd say Carthage is pretty diverse.
It's real small now. Either way, you're gonna see everybody all.
Well, I think also people have a lot of admiration for George Washington Carver in this area. I mean, he was a genius. And I think people admire that. And I think that also helps in this area, that you have somebody that went to such heights in his life as a scientist.
well, in this area too, there's a lot of artistic people like Thomas Hart Benton,
Right.
and they really did murals that were historically, still here.
Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King, basically advocated on this. We're going to wrap this up kind of quickly here, but Martin Luther King advocated a nonviolent way of civil disobedience. He didn't want, what that means, and the authors talk about it very, very well in the book, is that just don't accept the status quo. Be peaceful as you can in revolting against the status quo. In other words, the discrimination. In other words, Miss 43-year-old Rosa Parks, how dare you sit in the front of this bus? You know you're supposed to be in the back of this bus. She refused to move, to give her seat up to a white guy. And don't accept it. Yeah.
I read up on him a couple of times. I don't know how he did it.
I don't know how he did it either, quite frankly. I think it took a lot of intestinal fortitude, so to speak.
Well, I heard of the story of he was marching one time and a white fella picked up a rock and hit him in the head.
Sure.
Yeah. And he just brushed it off like something happened. And I mean, if it was me, I would be pretty pissed. But
Well, see, that would have made all the difference, though.
Yeah.
He knew he couldn't react that way, so
yeah.
he had to keep it straight.